Hello, New Zealand. Welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Bob McCoskrie. This is episode number 67, and it's the last one for the year, the end of our second year of broadcasting, and we haven't had a single Broadcasting Standards Authority complaint, mainly because we're not subject to the BSA. Anyway, we wouldn't listen. Tonight on our final episode for the year, we discuss the COVID report that's been released and the response of both the media and the politicians. Very interesting. Should we welcome Candace Owens into the country? And what ratings would the panellists give the coalition government on their first anniversary? And the panellists' last show of the year, they're going to wrap up their highs and lows, or their hits and misses for the year. Without further ado, let's meet our final panel for the year. Oh, it's a stunning lot. Ashley Church, firstly, down in the Hawke's Bay. How are you, Ashley?
I'm good. Nice to be back after a bit of a break.
Okay, beside you, Susie Miller, South Auckland. How are you, Susie?
I'm great, thank you. It's good to be here.
Okay, Ate proudly flying that wonderful flag, and we'll come to that topic in a minute. But how are you, Dr. Moala?
Malolele, I'm good, thank you.
Simon O'Connor, once again, in his beautifully manicured garden. Well done.
Thank you. I was racing about trying to find the right mug, Bob. I've got so many mugs now. Is it the right one for the right show? So just
there's two mugs in your shot. Oh no,
there's at least two mugs. There's maybe a third one behind the screen.
Well, yeah, actually, we've got the Straight Talk one, and there is a special deal on these, which you'll see in an email. Or, of course, you could have the Family First one. There we are. So we've got a lot of mugs. We've even got a political playback one, and this is the big seller. A blog. There we go.
Outrageous.
Hey, outrageous. Anyway, Brendan Malone in that massive city next to Christchurch, Rangiora. How are you, Brendan?
Yeah, good. You didn't tell us, Bob, that you wanted us to try and get broadcasting standard complaints, so I would have come prepared otherwise. And are you turning into a blooming cup seller or something, hawking your wares all over town?
I've always wanted to win the cup, and this is about the only one that I'll ever win.
Bob's Emporium.
Yes, image of the week. Well, the Navy reputation has been tarnished. And I do want to suggest that it's related to the video of the week. This is the head of the Defence Force, or the Navy, trying to explain how the autopilot works.
This turn was conducted in manual control. So the person in control was sitting in a seat with their left hand on that thruster and their right hand on that thruster, and had turned it into the direction so the ship can conduct that turn. The ship then proceeded along to the west, and at this stage the ship was engaged in autopilot, which required the perspex lid to be lifted and the switch to be set into autopilot, which showed up on that panel. This turn, the Court of Inquiry has determined, was conducted in autopilot.
There we are. So with the very pointy stick, we figured out that the ship was in autopilot, which is why none of the other buttons were working. But they didn't teach that at the Defence Force because they were too busy getting the rainbow tick. And diversity.
New Zealand Defence Force is really stepping up its commitment to gender equity. From the top of the organisation down, it's been adopting pledges to treat women well, to be more inclusive, and they are world leading in adopting such commitments.
And by actually having our senior people sign a gender equality charter, we're actually saying we are committed and we will be held accountable for our actions.
The charter itself is accompanied by a workshop, so it's not just a sign and go. People are actually thinking about what can they do, what's going on for their people, how can they support everyone having a good experience of the organisation and everyone getting their unique needs.
Yeah, well, they're having a very good experience, that's for sure. Actually, Simon, were you the Minister of Defence when you were in Parliament?
No, not the Minister of Defence, but I chaired the Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade Committee. And very briefly, this was already a concern back then, that instead of being effectively a military force focused on lethality and actually effectiveness, it was getting very much caught up in a lot of these woke ideas. And a certain ship sitting at the bottom of the water is indicative of that.
Okay, they obviously don't teach autopilot because they didn't teach it to those ones who were doing that inter-island ferry as well. There's something about, I mean, every one of us has probably used the auto speed thing on our cars, haven't we? And somehow we don't get those stuck anyway. I won't come to you
Bob,
for
well, that's
comment.
what I tell my wife about the dishwasher. I don't know what I'm doing. I need one of those wooden pointers next time to explain it.
Now, we do have some breaking news. It literally came out half an hour ago, and Simon alerted me to it, and it was this story. Christopher Luxon says that if the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu comes into New Zealand, he will be arrested. This is what he just has said.
The International Criminal Court a couple of weeks ago issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the former Defence Minister Yoav Gallant. If either of them came to New Zealand, would we enforce those warrants?
Yes, we support the ICC, and as I've said to you all along, those are matters before the court, but we believe in the international rules-based system, we support the ICC, and we'd be obligated to do so.
Okay, I'll just let Ate's blood pressure drop a little, and I might let the red go out of Ashley's face before he responds. Simon, as the, sort of politically correct member of the panel, and having been on the Foreign Affairs Committee, what's your thoughts on just what Luxon said?
Oh, look, absolutely disgraceful at a number of levels. And unfortunately, it just illustrates further that the Prime Minister's out of his depth when it comes to matters of foreign affairs. I mean, at the end of the day, Israel's one of our allies. We have their embassy here. We have, accreditations to Israel. They are our friends. And yet he's quite prepared to say that we will arrest their sitting head of government. Add to that, look, basically, without going into depth, others will be better at this than me, but the criminal court is just a joke. And the third thing I'd quickly add is only a couple of weeks ago, Luxon was more than happy to meet a genocidal dictator, which was President Xi of China. All smiles, and it was just all wonderful as he shook hands with this guy who's at least imprisoned 1 million Muslim Uyghurs, persecutes the Hong Kongers, House Christians and others, no problem whatsoever. But an Israeli Prime Minister will arrest them. So I return to what I say, Bob. He's completely out of his depth when it comes to foreign affairs.
Ashley, you want to comment on it?
Utterly gutless. This is, seriously, I mean, I've been watching this government over the last 12 months, and there's some areas where I've actually been really impressed with what they've done. But when it comes to anything that requires a moral compass, absolutely devoid. Anybody with a bit of wisdom would have recognized that the ICC over the last 20 or 30 years has become weaponized for political purposes. And anybody who had an ounce of integrity and actually understood what was going on in Israel rather than listening to the latest headlines would actually understand the reality of what's happening. There is no genocide. There is no apartheid. But rather than actually listening to people who know, and there's lots of them here in New Zealand as well, he's taken this utterly gutless stance, which I can only assume he's done for populist reasons. It just demonstrates to me yet again that he has the moral compass of an amoeba, and that this is just going to continue for the next 2 years.
Okay. Ate?
I agree with what Ashley and Simon said. I think it's so disgusting.
Brendan, you want to comment?
Marlo. No, sorry. I'd just like to say that, I just, this is not how you do diplomacy. Can I just sort of echo what Simon has said here, that like, even if you've got a leader of a country that genuinely was problematic, this is not how you go about things. And it just raises a really interesting question for me. If this is such a serious state of affairs that you would actually commit to publicly arresting the head of state of a foreign nation like this, then why do we have an embassy of theirs in our country? Why do we maintain diplomatic relations with them if it's that serious? This is so inconsistent. And Ashley's right, totally out of his depth. I really can't believe that this was actually said.
Yeah. Susie, you want to add to it, or has everyone vented their spleen and spoken on behalf of us?
I appreciate everything that's already been said.
Look, the comments aren't that complimentary either. Nancy Margaret says, hang on, Gordy's just looking for the cue. Here it is. Nancy Margaret says, go. Ate Williams says, there is a New Zealand Day in Israel. We love Israel in our house. Anne says, woke, uneducated PM. Sue says, yes, utterly gutless of Luxon. Watch the polls roll in. We've got a poll coming up, actually. Just come out. Yolanda says, well said, Ashley. He has no moral compass, but sadly he has no integrity. Colin says, Luxon is like, oh, yeah, boy. If tried come here, man, boy, yeah, I'd show him. Hope I sounded like him. Who are we up to? Amanda says, what the heck? So what, does he support terrorism? Colin says, why would Netanyahu visit New Zealand? Cheap shot Luxon. Kieran says, I'm sure Bibi had no plans to come here anyway. And Dave says, what is Luxon doing? So, yeah, not too complimentary there. Right, okay, let's get on to our first topic. Phase 1 of the Royal Commission of Inquiry into the COVID-19 response has been released. I'm sure you've read it, 713 pages with 39 recommendations to make sure that we're pandemic ready and resilient. And one of the big stories that came out was that the COVID-19 pandemic was associated with declining levels of public trust in government, as occurred in other countries, particularly in some communities. I would add media to that list, actually. Inquiry head Tony Blakely, an epidemiologist, said the vaccine mandates caused huge pain to a substantial minority during the pandemic, and the government should consider whether their benefits outweighed their harms. The damage to social cohesion needed to be considered when planning for future outbreaks. The report also named the occupation of Parliament grounds, which was run by Ate Moala, as the most significant civil unrest in Aotearoa, New Zealand for some time, and that it was likely to have far-reaching social consequences. The report also highlighted Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, or then Prime Minister, her single source of truth comment as being highlighted by submitters as unhelpful, which was probably a bit of an understatement, might not be the word they used. Now, just before I go around and ask you for your impression, panelists, I found what was quite incredible when the report was released last week was listening to some journalists talk about the protest. And I want to just play you one and listen to her say, it's Jenna Lynch, she used to be with News Hub, she's now with 3 News, and she asks questions like, did it have to get to this point? Did you acknowledge the concerns? A lot of them were really scared. I mean, it really is quite interesting to hear. You'll also hear a claim by Chris Hipkins regarding the protest. He pretends that an offensive, inappropriate banner stopped him going out to see the protesters. Have a listen.
At what point did you recognise that the response was affecting social cohesion?
Oh, I mean, it was pretty obvious to everybody who saw the number of people out the front, occupying Parliament, that social cohesion. No, I mean, I think we were starting to see it at the end of that Auckland lockdown period.
The once pretty united team of 5 million fractured. People lost jobs, families fought, friendships were torn apart, fires were lit, social cohesion was broken.
It was a pretty divisive time towards the end there, as was evidenced by the parliamentary protests, and there'll be a range of views on all sides of it.
We had very large groups of people refusing to go to work unless everybody in their workplace was vaccinated. I know everybody forgets that now, but that was actually one of the things that the government had to weigh up at the time.
The inquiry ruled the occupation of Parliament represented the most significant civil unrest in New Zealand for some time. It is likely to have far-reaching social consequences, it said.
Why didn't I go and talk to them? I think that was pretty obvious. When they have a noose hanging at the front of the protest with my name on it, would you go and speak to them?
But did it have to get to that point? Did it have to get to the point of nooses? Was there something that the government could have done earlier to acknowledge the concerns of those who were, a lot of them were really scared?
Yeah, a lot of people were scared right the way through the response.
The loss of trust in government due to some of the later decisions and the impact of mandates would make future pandemic responses more difficult. And no one knows when that might be.
Lovely report, wasn't it? It really sounded like the reporter was on the side of the protesters. Just one more video before I get your comment. This is, I think, when the turning point happened in the whole COVID issue, and it's when Jacinda lost her prime ministership. It's when she had this little clip from her interview.
You basically said this is going to be like, well, it's almost like, you probably don't see it like this, the 2 different classes of people. If you're vaccinated or if you're unvaccinated, you have all these rights. If you are vaccinated...
That is what it is. So, yep. Yeah,
I think that was the end of an era. Now, let's find out what you panellists think about this review. Ashley, kick us off. What do you think?
Yeah, so it's worth remembering where this report came from. This was the initial report that Labor commissioned, the previous government commissioned to conduct an inquiry on what had happened. And if we remember what it was about, this was essentially, let's be honest, this was about exonerating the government of any responsibility for what had actually taken place. And when the new government came in, because this work had already started, rather than stopping it and starting again, they said, let's continue with this and let it run its course, but we're going to have a completely new commission or a completely new study based on some wider terms of reference, and that report is still underway, and I think that's being reported back next year. So this was always the soft report, and even though a year's passed since the new government came in, when you look at this and you look at some of the recommendations, even the stuff that you just quoted, Bob, mostly, and I apologize if there's any exceptions to this, but where they make a criticism, it's usually quoting somebody else. So it's not them saying it, it's them quoting somebody else who said it, saying that it was distressful and some of these other things. So this was a pretty weak, insipid, very tightly defined terms of reference report that was designed basically to exonerate the previous government of its responsibility for what took place. What I'm hoping is that the more substantial report, which is still to come, which will have a much broader terms of reference, will actually get into some of the real meaty issues. But the other comment that I would make is that I'm not necessarily focusing on the previous government, because they're gone. They've paid the ultimate price. You're quite right, Bob. It's the media. It's the role that the media played in this, and the fact that they were complicit in essentially what happened, and the fact that they're now turning around and trying to indicate that somehow they've got some concern about it based on the findings of this report, frankly, is the height of hypocrisy.
Well, let me just show you one from the weekend. News Talk ZB host saying Labour owes New Zealand an apology for its COVID vaccine mandates. They ruined people's lives. Where did that come from? I never heard that in 2021, 22. And in fact, the author was actually telling people to get the jab. So, yeah, it's been a complete turnaround. Susie, what did you think of the report?
Yeah, it is a soft report. I'm just grateful that we're addressing this. I tried to block all of that out of my memory, but it's good to bring it up again. It's so necessary. And you can tell by some of your tweets, Bob, when you mention the vaccination, when you mention the mandates, you're getting like so many likes, like over 1,000, which is not normal for you. And it's it's really important, because I think the government and the media were one and the same. And Jessica and Tova were meant to ask the questions that we needed asked, that we needed, answers to. But all we got was fear. It was just a narrative of fear. And as a pastor, it was the best of times, because I had a more receptive congregation. I would phone them and they'd answer straight away. Most of the time we're like, I'm good. But during COVID, just the daily message of fear meant that people were like happy to receive the calls, happy to receive care packages that we would deliver. And I see relationships that still haven't healed, and because people have different reactions to fear. And the daily, like, just drumming down of fear into every single person, every single relationship. A lot of relationships have healed, but so many haven't. Yeah. And I remember a 7-year-old girl in our church, when she found out that she had COVID, she wept and she apologized to her parents and said, I'm so sorry that Mum and Dad, I really tried, but I'm sorry that I'm going to die and leave you behind. And that's the level of fear that the government needs to apologize for. It was traumatic, and all the worst statistics went up. Suicide, divorce, mental health, and family violence. That was all a result of what the government was saying, and they didn't have any humility in their approach. They never said, let's pray about this. That would have been amazing. And so I look back on that and I think, thank goodness for this report. And I am so looking forward to the second report, because that should invoke a lot more of a response from Chris Hipkins. He's crazy. The denial in that man. Yeah. And here's the thing. I think Chris Luxon has the amazing opportunity to give us a Christmas present by apologizing. It doesn't have to be in 30 years' time. He should take the initiative now, look at the results of the report, and just see that, people need an apology. the power of that would just be so great for our nation, for our country. It's needed right now. And if I was his assistant, that's the thing that I would be saying, do this now, mate. It's what our country needs. That's just my opinion.
Well, I might come to you, Simon, straight off the back of that, because, I mean, that's a very good question. Isn't Christopher Luxon compromised by all of this? Because he was complicit in the silence coming out of Parliament. In fact, the National Party, as you well know, they were busy rolling Simon Bridges because Simon was one of the few leaders actually pushing back on some of the narrative, in my view. And so is Chris Luxon going to actually acknowledge that there's an issue as well, or is he going to be like Chris Hipkins?
Yeah, not a chance that he'll acknowledge this, and it goes back to Ashley's earlier comments around the approach to anything that has a moral component to it. They just won't touch it with a barge pole. He won't go near it for some of the reasons you've touched on and others. I mean, look, long and short, you're seeing already an attempt to rewrite the narrative. The media, certainly, like you've highlighted, Bob, it's striking. And some actually reporters that we've actually got a bit of time for, certainly I do, are ignoring exactly what they did and said years ago, and now hoping people will forget that. Chris Hipkins is doing the same. Current government MPs and ministers also doing the same. And I just point out too that, I get quite frustrated when I see the particular imagery they use of these protests or occupation.
Yeah.
There's no denying what happened at the very end. But that is not representative of what was happening out in front of Parliament for weeks prior to that. So at one level, Bob, you've got this rewrite of a narrative, a whole group of people, politicos, media, trying to say, oh, let's forget and move on. But you also have them at the same time still trying to push a false narrative about what happened. And actually, if I might finish on this, kudos to Tony Blakely. I think there were a number of us, myself included, who were quite concerned because of his relationship with Jacinda of what would actually come out. But while it's all couched in diplomatic language, he's been very, very clear, actually, that many, many mistakes were made by political leadership, scientific leadership, medical leadership, and others.
Yeah.
Simon, do you think we'd have the same report if Labour was still in power?
No, I think we'd have a different one, actually. I hate to say that, but, as my cup says, no apologies and no compromise, which is the motto of Straight Talk. It's always good to have the cup there to remind me. No, they would have edited it. It would have been a very different feel. So you can actually give some kudos, is that the right word, to the current government, probably as much through to Winston Peters and the crew there that have pushed this to say we're actually going to have it far more neutral, as far as any report coming out of a government can be.
Ashley, when you talk to Simon, you just look straight down, sort of like the Brady Bunch, because he's right below you, okay? Just look down, Ashley. Brendan, what do you reckon? Was it as weak as dishwater, or was there actually something constructive out of it?
It's interesting. It's definitely trying to hedge its bets when you look at the report in full, because it's saying things, and this is one of my frustrations with it, it's saying, well, earlier on these things were justified, but then they just went too far. The problem I have is, what was your justification for them in the first place? So one thing that's really obvious to me is there is zero moral reasoning in this report. What was the moral basis for taking away things like individual sovereignty over healthcare, or the sovereignty of churches or workplaces, etc.? Where was that? There's no moral reasoning. Now, that is very typical of bureaucracies, because they don't think in moral terms, and particularly state bureaucracies, they believe in the total state. They should have control over every sphere of everyone's life. And so that's not surprising, but it is a problem as far as I'm concerned, because you can't really resolve this until you get to those sort of questions. And so for me, the big issue is, what was your reasoning? And if you don't even want to look at moral reasoning, well, how about just even some evidence-based reasoning? Like, for example, when you were mandating vaccines, why did you do that? When we've got decades of research showing that if you use the stick instead of the carrot with vaccine programs, you get worse results. It's actually not a good thing to do. We know that. So there's no sort of understanding how they arrived at those positions. And I think that is a big glaring omission. Okay. Ate, did the results tell you? And actually, just before you say something, I just grabbed my cap, my Jessica then Tova cap, which was the McBlog cap. Yeah. We got amazing coverage of that. That's when McBlog really took off. Thanks to Jessica and Tova. These are not for sale, but the cups are. Anyway, what do you reckon, Ate?
Cap.
Oh
Oh my goodness. Yep. Yeah, I agree with what has been said. This is just Labour driving. This is just so soft and weak. It's not independent, as people would like to say. There is conflict of interest. Tony Blakely is a buddy of Ashley Broomfield. So it's absolutely not. I mean, there's so many things that they could look at. Fancy writing, 713 pages. That's free master's degree or a PhD. Do you really need that to own up to what has been going on? And as far as, I mean, it's just so disgusting. Why didn't they look at, the 11,000 health workers that were voluntarily exempt because they're at the front line and they knew that there is damage? Or what about the hundreds of those, in the army? So they knew there was something going on. And then they released stuff like the, myocarditis. A year later, on the 20th of December. So it's all, this is just all pretense and the hypocrisy of it all. So does the Labour government need to apologise? I believe they do not know the language of apology. Hipkins and Jacinda, they should go to jail. But probably like Biden, who just excused his son, which is himself. So if they were sent to jail, they'll probably do the same thing, like just what Biden have just done with his son. With regard to hoping for the next phase, I think it's going to be a waste of money, waste of taxpayers' money. What are they going to do about it? What is the government going to do about it? What is the people going to do about it? What about putting that money and to help people who've been injured, those who have lost their families, their businesses? Why don't you give them that? There's so many people who've been injured. They still have not been accepted as an injury by ACC. These people have lost everything. Why don't we give the money to them? That's my thoughts.
I can partly answer that, Bob, because of the question that just asked. The whole point of these things, it's not about the recommendations, it's the whole truth and reconciliation aspect of it. And the point of this, if it's done properly, should be to basically what you guys said before. It should be for the government, for the media to apologise, to take responsibility for what they did. There's none of that in this. The recommendations are almost a smokescreen. They're a side issue. It's about whether or not people are going to take responsibility, and clearly that ain't going to happen.
Well, the media are saying that the government should apologise. Maybe the government's saying that the media should apologise. I'm not sure. I actually did a word search of the report looking for rapid antigen testing because that was one of the things that we said could help alleviate some of the division, which means that people who chose not to get vaccinated, they had to prove they were negative by having a rapid antigen test. Seemed to be a pretty good solution. Of course, it's the gold standard now for testing anybody, and it was for people coming in through the border. But there was virtually no mention of rapid antigen test. It was just in passing. There was no analysis of whether that should have been used. So I am interested just to ask you panellists what you would like to see come out of the second inquiry and the response. Ashley, you have started on that, and I'll get you just to sum up. But the second inquiry is looking at vaccine mandates, the approval of specific vaccines. So I think, Ate, that might be what you're looking at, vaccine safety, including the monitoring and reporting of adverse reactions. And they're also looking at the extended lockdowns, whether they worked, and the tracking and tracing. So I assume that they'll look at rapid antigen testing as part of that. So, Ashley, do you think the second analysis might, I mean, it's actually three independent people. One is a KC, and his name escapes me. Do you remember who it is, Simon? He's done a lot around religious freedom, actually. I'll think of it while you're talking, Ashley.
Yeah, you've put me on the spot now, I've forgotten.
Yeah, that's okay. But Ashley, do you think anything positive is going to come out of the second one? And is that all you want, an apology?
Oh, no, there's more than that for me. So I wrote an article on this about a year and a half ago, and for me, if I can put this in really simple terms, the big issue that's never been discussed was whether or not COVID was as serious as we thought it was going to be. And what I mean by that is that when this whole thing first started, the reason we had lockdowns, the reason that nations around the world took the actions that they did was because it was being compared to Spanish flu, which had a 7% mortality rate in 1918. Had there been a 70% mortality rate for COVID, we would have lost 500 million people worldwide. We didn't. We lost about 7 million. So it was a fraction, about 1/100th of the number of deaths. So my argument's always been this thing simply wasn't the pandemic and the scary thing that it was made out to be. So for me, what I'd like to see is come out of this report is an acknowledgement of that and a recognition that if this ever happens again, that we have much more robust systems in place to actually make sure that the actions being taken are necessary, because this went from essentially a health crisis for the first 9 or so months. Labor got elected with an overwhelming majority, and it very quickly turned into a political phenomenon. It went from being about health to being about Labor thinking, hey, that worked for us. We got great support. This is going to hold it up. And if we keep doing these things, we're going to keep being popular. So I want to see that. I don't expect that to happen.
Okay, I hope you all appreciated the title of this particular section of Straight Talk. We had great fun thinking it. COVID report goes viral. Ka-ching. Susie, your husband said you needed to say something about Anthony Fauci. Do you want to make any comment?
Down with Fauci. Oh, he needs to go to jail first. And I cannot believe he's still allowed to speak. I think he recently just reiterated the fact that it's a natural, that the cause was natural. With this second report, I would like to see a really robust analysis of the vaccine mandates and why they were enforced so strongly. By the time I'm pretty sure from memory, by the time that was enforced, we were into not the Delta one, but the one that was fairly
Omicron.
Yeah. It was fairly severe. If you caught it, different reactions, of course, but largely, like with schools, I was on the board. We had to fire our own daughter because she didn't want got the first vaccine, but she didn't want the second one. And my husband sent a letter to Ashley Bloomfield just discussing using the binomial distribution, just discussing the very tiny likelihood that teachers and teacher aides would pass on anything to the kids. And, and I don't think he'd put this in, but when the kids got it, their immune system was so strong, and no kids died. I don't know, I might be wrong, but I don't think any kids died in New Zealand from catching Omicron or catching COVID. So he never got a response from Ashley Bloomfield, and
how surprising.
There needs to be some really stringent, really deep searching of these people who are involved and forcing this stuff on us and causing the division that it did. Like they'll say, oh yeah, this was the worst response and the biggest, the largest divide of our nation ever. But what do you expect when you do this kind of a wholesale like ruining of people's lives? Of course. Vaccine mandates, I'd love to see the results on that.
Yeah, same. At the end of December 2021, we actually did this Don't Divide Us petition, and 87,000 signatures were put in, tried to get some discussion on using rapid antigen testing as an alternative, even talked about all the jobs. Here was a full-page ad we did with all the jobs that were being lost. A lot of them weren't even people-facing, truck drivers, tractor drivers, and all that type of stuff. So, they just didn't seem to want to listen. Ate, do you think, I mean, I know you said that we shouldn't pay for another report. Let's just give the money to where the need is. But we probably, do you want an apology?
It's not going to work. I mean, the trust have been lost. If there's another pandemic, I think what we acknowledge is that what Labor did was just working together with the police to see how quickly they can control people, and they succeeded in causing fear. What I was disgusted about this soft report that has come through, where Blakely was referring that it only affected a significant minority. How many people have to die of myocarditis? How many young men, are now suffering? They can't continue on their life. Is that a substantial minority? Just this kind of language and cover up just makes me disgusted. So I really don't have any, I don't think that there's anything that'd be useful coming out of it, because even if they start looking at the science for real, all the stuff that Fauci had created and all of that. I mean, if you don't go back to the beginning and have a look at it was just a big lie, then, what's the point?
Yeah. Okay. The name I was trying to think of was Grant Illingworth, KC, who has done quite a bit of work around religious freedom, actually, and did a couple of opinions for us on gay marriage. So, I hope I haven't just cancelled him. And there's also Judy Kavanagh and Anthony Hill, who I haven't heard of. Have you heard of them, Simon?
I've heard of her, but not Anthony, but clearly good people.
And the report isn't due until February 2026, so that'll be about our 91st episode. Anyway, Brendan, what do you want? Do you just want an apology? What do you want out of the second report?
Well, I think apology is important, but I predicted on my podcast about 2-3 years ago, I believe it'll be 5 to 10 years before we see that. This way, this process will play out, because no one will want to admit that they actually got it wrong. And so there have to be a new generation of leaders come in and actually admit. What I'd like to see in the meantime is a couple of things. Number one is I want a probe into the use of fear as a tool for basically public manipulation and control, really, the direction of public traffic, if you like. In the UK, they have something called the nudge units, which are designed for behavioural control. The nudge unit organisation has one of its offices based in Wellington here as well. I'd like to know what their involvement was in all of this, because it's quite widely acknowledged in the UK that unleashing fear was a disastrous thing and it should not have been done. And then also I would like some questions explored around how we arrived at the Pfizer contract and the way that sort of wheeling and dealing was done behind the scenes. And in particular, I think also the question of how the heck did we arrive at this commonly repeated refrain that the vaccine would reduce transmission, when we know now from Official Information Act requests overseas from a couple of years ago, Pfizer have said they never tested for that. So how did our politicians come to that? Did Pfizer tell a lie, or did our politicians just sort of make it up on the fly? I mean, that's a really important question, because that drove so much of what we saw with the mandates.
Yeah. Simon, it's fairly rare that you have kind of two reports right in a row. Is this just really pandering to New Zealand First, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it seems to be Labour's the first one, New Zealand First is the second one. Is that correct?
Yeah, look, I don't think it is pandering. I think it's a very pragmatic way of approaching things. I mean, you could have scrapped the first report and just started all over again with a much bigger, broader review. I think the government probably made the right decision to finish the one that has just been published and start a second one that is broader. There's mischief that could be created within that, but we'll have to see. Look, just a couple of very, very quick observations. I'm not optimistic that there'll ever be an apology, but, that's my deeply cynical nature. Second observation, isn't it striking that you don't hear from Jacinda Ardern or Ashley Bloomfield? Michael Baker is remarkably quiet. Susie Wiles, they've all just disappeared.
Yes.
Just a very, very quick observation there. And look, the other, just two last very quick points. In some ways, we already know the facts. And by the way, that's not an argument to not have the Royal Commission. But we do know that the government and others manipulated people through fear by playing the collective against the individual. And so forth. So, I think intuitively a number of us know it. But I just want to echo something that Brendan said in the previous section is, for me personally, I'd like the report to delve just that little bit deeper, because in behind this, the basic rights and freedoms of New Zealanders were tossed out the window. And I've argued in Parliament and since that, if you have rights, you have freedoms like the freedom of conscience, freedom of belief, freedom of medical choices. They matter in the bad times. You don't need those rights in the good times. Those rights only matter when the pressure's on. And in New Zealand, when the pressure came on COVID, just about every fundamental human right went out the window. And I would really like the report to delve into that, because if we don't address that, and again, Brendan was far more articulate, but if we don't address that, this is just going to happen again. New Zealanders will just roll over again. I'm sorry to say. I mean, I've said this publicly a few times, but we've got to get to the heart or the depth of the matter.
Okay, one fun video just before we leave this topic. Of course, even
just a bit of light relief.
Up until the election, even Chris Hipkins was saying, no, the vaccine wasn't forced on anybody. And somebody put this lovely little collage together.
The vaccine mandates, I acknowledge that it was a challenging time for people, but they ultimately made their own choices. There was no compulsory vaccination. People made their own choices.
The government is planning to require every single teacher at every level and all support staff who work with children to be vaccinated.
There was no compulsory vaccination.
Newshub can reveal the mandate Chris Hipkins is taking to Cabinet on Monday is a mighty big stick. Every educator who works with a child will have to be vaccinated.
People made their own choices. I can now confirm that we'll be extending this requirement to large parts of our health and education workforces as well. There was no compulsory vaccination. Schools and early learning staff and the support people who work with them, who have contact with children and students, will need to be fully vaccinated by the 1st of January 2022. There was no compulsory vaccination. That includes home-based educators, all those who support people in our schools and early learning services such as teacher aides, administration and maintenance staff, and contractors. People made their own choices. Secondary schools in Kura will also be required to keep a COVID-19 vaccination register of their students. There was no compulsory vaccination. Students.
Okay, it does go on, but you sort of get the point, and it sort of does show it up.
If you looked carefully at him in that picture, you could see flames coming from behind him from his pants.
Well, it's funny you say that, actually, because just looking at the comments here, Stacey, this came through while we were watching it, says gaslighting. Exactly right. Fine Weather said second report is Winston's election ticket, which is probably true, but it's a good ticket. Neil says, good point, Ate. It was fascinating to observe how compliant we were and how the closet authoritarians came out of the woodwork. My local librarians, without exception, just loved it. Watch those librarians. Nancy Margaret says, that's what frightened me, how quickly we ran into our houses when we were told to lock down. Kevin says, thanks, Brendan. True, no more rules by fear. Disarray says, don't forget to push your podcast, Brendan. He did. Gabrielle says, why is no one blaming the real offenders? Who? World Health Organization. They were the perpetrators of the crime. Colin liked my joke earlier on that you guys have all forgotten. Alan says, Luxon has just officially lined New Zealand with Hamas and their puppet master, Iran. Utterly disgraceful. This will never be forgiven. Simply Green says, there's a couple of things I'd like to see debated, the death penalty and right to self-defense. Gordon, just note that down for next year. Siu says, great talk, Susie. Is that your mum, Susie?
Thanks, Mum. Love you.
Yeah, okay. Now, we're not letting Benjamin Netanyahu into the country, but we're also not letting Candace Owens in. The conservative American commentator, as the media call her, has been denied a visa to enter New Zealand. Immigration New Zealand said that the reason was because Australia's banned her. And so apparently that's a reason for her not coming in. The reason Australia denied her entry was that they said she had the capacity to widely incite discord. And the foreign minister said, the immigration minister, Tony Burke, said, quote, Australia's national interest is best served when Candace Owens is somewhere else. From downplaying the impact of the Holocaust with comments about Nazi physician Joseph Mengele through to claims that Muslims started slavery, Candace Owens has the capacity to incite discord in almost every direction. Ashley, I'm interested to know. I know you're a free speech champion, but also know that you think that some of the views of Candace Owens are a bit whack. So should she be allowed in the country?
Yeah, so she's a bit of an enigma, Candace. She's, she has some extraordinarily astute insights into what's going on in society, a large number of which I would have to say I agree with, not that that should feed into this debate at all. But her views on the Jews and on Israel are frankly nuts. She buys into some centuries-old tropes. It's the sort of the Rothschilds taking over the world and controlling the media stuff. It's just insane. It's wacky stuff. So which really surprises me, given the sense that she brings to so many other topics. However, regardless of that, of course she should be allowed into the country. It shouldn't come down to what she says and whether or not we agree with it or not. It's a basic fundamental principle of being a democracy, and a democracy which values free speech and has always done so, that we should be open to not just the views that we agree with, but the views that we disagree with. So there's absolutely no question that she should be allowed into the country, and that she should be able to say whatever she chooses to say, regardless of whether you and I might agree with it or not.
Yeah. Okay. Ate, do you agree with that?
Oh, yeah, I think Candace should be allowed to come for the same reason Ashley have said. Unfortunately, the New Zealand Immigration Public Health Service is filled with lefty woke loonies who think they know what's good for New Zealand and who should come in and not. What I also despise is a double standard, in the New Zealand government. What we had mentioned before, this terrorist from China has come in, communist China, and they just allowed them to come in. The Prime Minister of Qatar had come into New Zealand, and Qatar has been a country that has housed Hamas leadership for years. I mean, we need to acknowledge that Hamas is a terrorist organization. They raped the women in Israel on October 7, and they're still holding, some of their captives that they took over a year ago. So this is Qatar, who's now come in and go to bed with Luxon, and they've got this trade agreement, 70 million, just, like a carrot. It's just absolutely idiotic. And then our halal meat as if we are Islam country. So all this nonsense, but it's time for this shroud to come off and all that's hidden. The good thing, I believe that Candace will come at some point. So what they've done here now for beating her is probably good for her publicity. Her stance against abortion and the trans, I agree with. She doesn't deny the Holocaust, but, as Ashley said, she's got some weird ideas about the Jews and Israelis. I really would encourage people to read what Dennis Prager had written to her. It was just a lovely letter explaining to her and hopefully pointing out to her some of the correct facts about Zionism, about the Jews. It's a well-written letter. So I think people should, if they take time to read that, that'd be really good. But I think, New Zealand should be a free country. Unfortunately, it's not, but she should be allowed to come, and I hope she come to Wellington.
So if you Google Dennis Prager, Prager, Dennis Prager, which is from Prager University, and just Google Dennis Prager, Candace Owens, you'll see the letter there. I mean, some of the things she said, she's downplayed the Holocaust, questioning the authenticity of well-documented events like Joseph Mengele's medical experiments. She suggested that Israel was involved in 9/11 attacks, that the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, was founded to protect a Jewish pedophile, that the Jewish control of the media, and I don't know how they control the media with the coverage of Gaza, and that Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin was secretly Jewish. So there is some interesting thoughts there. So Brendan, should we let her in?
Well, I'll tell you what, right now for free, if she read a few more books, Joseph Stalin thankfully died when he did, because in actual fact, Stalin was preparing camps and a whole nother genocide of the Jews in Russia because he had turned on them. Initially, a lot of Jewish people were communists, they were supportive, and then he started blaming them, and thankfully he died before executing another Holocaust in Russia. So yeah, she's just got that completely wrong. But anyway, leaving that aside, I think that if you're going to ban someone from coming into the country, to me, this is an extraordinary step. And what's happened here is it looks like a faceless bureaucrat has just made the decision. I think if it's, and particularly someone of profile, I actually think surely at the very least Parliament should be involved in such a process. But it seems to me it's an extraordinary step, and it has to be truly warranted. Like this person actually is someone who has, for example, a criminal record, or who has, for example, the capacity to set up terrorist cells in a country, things like that. There's none of that here. And what really concerns me is this has actually created a precedent now. And so what happens next time someone who perhaps doesn't have even some of the controversial views that Candace might subscribe to wants to come to New Zealand, but they are deemed to be verboten because they have the wrong think? That's what really troubles me about this.
Yeah. Okay. Simon, could we let her in?
Oh, absolutely. It's an appalling decision. Brendan and I actually sat down on a podcast a few weeks back around this whole managerial class, faceless, unelected bureaucrats who are making these decisions. And I think it's actually quite disappointing that both the Minister of Immigration and Associate Minister are not at this point doing anything. They should be intervening. This is a free speech issue. Everything you guys have touched on in terms of her views that are objectionable, for me, are true. I find a lot of her stuff completely bonkers, but she's allowed to say them. That's called free speech. And so a couple of other very quick points. I have no doubt whatsoever that there's a whole pile of far left progressive lunatics coming into the country. And look, the media will never cover them, Bob, but they're here. But no one ever talks about that. The other side of it all is at day's end, we're meant to have supposedly, if we had moved this into the political space, beyond what we've already touched on, New Zealand's meant to have this independent foreign policy and we think for ourselves. Except in this case, Australia has banned her, therefore we better do the same. I mean, absolute ridiculousness. And again, it's that lack of consistency. But as others have noted, if this continues, if she's not allowed to speak here, more will happen. And it will only be one side. It'll be more to those who are determined to be on the right or conservative or Christian or whatever. And people should be alarmed by that.
Well, there was Posey Parker, I think, was having trouble getting back for the court case. Avi Yemeni from Rebel News, Candace Owens. What's common amongst those three? They're all right-leaning, conservative. So we need, Simon, we need a DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency with Elon Musk to just clean out Wellington and get rid of all the bureaucrats who I'm sure you came across in your time in Parliament. Drain the swamp,
Not
exactly.
too quickly, because I can see Brendan's hand up. I mean, even taking the bureaucrats out of the equation, it's that cultural mindset of an enormous arrogance that a selected few decide what you and I and listeners can and cannot listen to. And the final irony, if I want to talk consistency, New Zealand has banned a black woman from speaking. If this was a woman on the left, this was a Kamala Harris, all hell would break loose. But because she's centre-right or right-wing or whatever we want to term her, the fact that she's a black woman gets ignored, and that cannot be lost in this debate. New Zealand has willingly and happily blocked a black woman, a woman of colour, coming to speak. Anyway, I saw Brendan's hand up and I now feel bad.
Actually, Simon, it's Kamala, you racist. Brendan, what were you going to say?
I was just going to quickly say, I've actually noticed the theme as we were talking that under this national government, all of a sudden it looks like we're actually outsourcing the governance of our nation to foreign entities, whether it's Australia or whether it's the International Criminal Court, and that is really concerning. What about our nation?
Okay, Susie, I know you're a big fan of Candace Owens, and to be honest, I like listening to her podcast as well. I just think she's got some wacky views. Do you think we should let her in?
Yeah, heck yeah. What kind of pansy marshmallow society can't allow Candace to come in and hurt their ears? Like, it's pathetic. And Australia is so good at that. And then we just use them as, we're just going to follow along. It's copy and paste, and I can't stand that. I take Simon's point. I'm like, how dare you block a black woman? How about blocking some white women who unequivocally, I can say, do massive damage to young girls' mental health if that's what we're worried about, being all soft. And Pink comes here and she just bleats on about abortion and bleats on about, feminism and all that kind of stuff. And it's crazy. What about Taylor Swift? She probably wouldn't try to come here anyway, but she would never be blocked in her leftist, wokist attitudes and message and, empowerment and stuff. So sad. It's just embarrassing. And I think Candace is probably laughing at us, and I'm waiting for Matt Walsh to make another blog about how pansy we are. It's just embarrassing how we're looking right now, and we're just tethering ourselves to Australia and just, I'm embarrassed.
I noticed you covered black woman, white woman, and pink woman there.
All the other colours are allowed, but not her. But anyway.
I hear what you're saying, Ashley. We need a new flag.
Straight Talk, the show of diversity. There we go. I just want to say that Susie and Ate are making the guys look like absolute wimps on the show. I mean, they're just coming in full strength. It's pathetic, guys. You need to harden up.
We're married men. We're married men. Come on.
We're the decaffeinated of coffee.
Look, we are just about out of time. I'm going to do some fast-paced question-answer, team, just to get through this last bit. First question is your grade out of 10 for the coalition government. It's their first birthday last week. What would you give them out of 10 for their first 12 months? Ashley?
10 on economics and infrastructure, 2 on pretty much everything else.
Okay. Susie?
I may have not paid enough attention, but I tried to gather some good things about so 1 for the COVID report, 2 for structured literacy, that's working. 3, I thought the budget was good. 4 for Simeon Brown's transport moves, and I couldn't get to 5. So I guess my landing is 4.
Okay, well done.
Is it?
It's only because your street where you live has the most judder bars in the whole of New Zealand, doesn't it?
Exactly.
I know that. Yeah. Ate, what would you give them out of? Yeah, what would you get? Were you doing out of 5 or 10, Susie? That was out of 5, wasn't
It was out of 10. I was trying to think of more reasons, more good things.
All right. You're a terribly hard marker.
Yeah.
Wow. Lucky you didn't homeschool. None of your kids would have got through. Ate, what would you give out of 10?
8 for the economy and 1 for everything else, and minus 10 for the moral issue.
Yeah, good call.
Simon, what would you give? I mean, it was 12 out of 10 when you were in Parliament. What's it now?
Of course. Oh, look, I'd give them a 5 out of 10, and that I'm quite indifferent. If I was to put everything together, there's positives from economic management, changing the history curriculum and so forth, but a whole lot of other things. There have been, a lot of talk. We're in greater debt, we're spending more money. So put it all together, I'd say we're a 5 out of 10. It's an indifferent coalition at the moment.
Okay. And Brendan?
Yeah, I tend to lean where Ashley's gone, although I probably wouldn't be as high with my top mark. I'd say sort of 8, 9 in some areas. But I think really where they have failed miserably is with the actual leadership. And it's not looking too flash at the moment. Luxon's really got to up his game. Otherwise, that's going to be a problem for them.
Okay. Highlights of the year and lowlights. Let's start with the highlight of the year. Once again, Ashley, what was your highlight of the year? It can be anything.
Simon already alluded to it, and Ate did too. It's a combination of some of the things that the government's done around the changing the history curriculum back to, and restoring free speech, although the last item probably questions that a little bit. So all of those positive things that have been done to restore some sense of Kiwiness. So I guess you want the bad stuff later. So that's the good stuff.
Yep. Okay, that's your highlight. Susie, what was your highlight of the year?
Oh, CAS report was good.
CAS report on puberty blockers, yep.
Hamas operatives eliminated. I was very happy when Iman Khalif, the transgender boxer, was exposed, and I was very happy when Trump won.
Okay. Yep, 4 highlights. That's okay. You're allowed to. I'm not going to argue. I'm scared. Ate?
Highlights. I think this year has been a great awakening. People have woken up and are turning away from the lies of the left and their wokeness. I think what Trump have done, his re-election, have turned things around, and he's dodged a bullet, and hopefully America and the rest of the world will dodge the big bullet. I am so happy about that. Courageous is contagious. I love that Elon Musk had woken up to the fact that they lied about his son, and now he's really after the transgender lies. And that people have found their voice. The Tonga rugby team, Matema Tonga, even though they lose, they sing and they shout.
Okay. Simon, highlight of the year?
I'd just like to say to viewers that Bob is not standing to my left and right with a pistol with this next comment, but actually joining the Family First crew has been a highlight, and the chance to actually be everything from StraightTalk to running the likes of Solid Ground and other advocacy. I've just found that incredibly enjoyable, and as some have heard me say, it's ironic that I'm more free to speak now outside of Parliament. But that personal reflection aside, the other highlight is actually the Republican across the board win in America. I think they're not going to get everything right, but I think it's going to shake things up in a way that will be helpful for the Western world as a whole.
I'd just like to remind you, Simon, that you're not under parliamentary privilege when you speak at staff meetings. So just a reminder about that. We will sue you.
As long as you're not recording it or taking screenshots, as some of my former colleagues used to do.
Yes. Okay. Tough life. Brendan, highlight of the year?
Well, a couple of highlights for me. One was actually the conversion of Russell Brand to Christianity. Another one was Joe Rogan actually really sort of opening up to the possibility of Christ being more than he'd thought of him previously. And then I think also for me, I think Elon Musk actually purchasing Twitter. It opened up breathing space for global conversation that we had been lacking badly.
Yep, and I have finally got Simon O'Connor on Twitter, although he won't tell anybody where he is. He just lurks around in the dark looking for interesting conversations. You also missed out Jordan Peterson. I think he is close to a personal faith
he's
as well.
Getting close as well, yeah. When your wife goes, you're not far behind.
No, that's right. Look, we don't want to get too negative, so let's just make it one. What was one negative of the year, Ashley?
By far and away, and the single biggest issue facing the entire world was the growing tide of the evil of anti-Semitism re-emerging, more or less as it did in the 1930s prior to World War II. And I say that not just in respect of the impact on the Jews and on Israel, but on the knock-on effect of that behavior and the world community's attitude toward the Jews on the entire world and the implications of that. By far and away the most negative in 2023.
From a Christian perspective, it's been pretty stink. I'm seeing lots of international leaders and pastors being exposed for some pretty dark stuff. That hasn't been cool, but I guess that's a good thing.
Yeah. Yep. Into the light. Ate?
I echo the same with Ashley regarding the against the Jews all over the world and in New Zealand. But the good thing is that, the rubbish from ICC and the actual building where they think it's built on sand, so it's going to fall apart. So anyway.
Okay. Simon?
Yeah, where to start? Look, I think probably the more general one is exactly what Ashley and Ate have touched on. The re-emergence of anti-Semitism and then the wider dynamics that come out of that, which is basically a Western world determined to destroy itself, which leads us down a very, very dark path. More personally, although there's a bit of a silver lining to this, having confirmation that I was targeted by the CCP and having my communications targeted and accessed was not particularly endearing, nor the relatively weak response. But that's just more personal. Yeah.
Okay, Brendan?
Yeah, good question. I think probably realistically, I think I'm someone who actually I think I have a sort of an approach. I don't have the same approach. I know that Ashley perhaps and Ate do to Israel. I think there are some legitimate complaints that can be made there. But yeah, they're absolutely right. The rise of anti-Semitism, it is a very, very worrying trend. And the other big one for me is that actually just a couple of weeks ago and very quietly unannounced by the media, the fact that for the first time ever, Africa has now recorded negative population, and that's not good because everyone was thinking Africa's positive population would make up for everyone else. Well, that's collapsed. Yeah. So that's not a good sign for the world moving forward.
Yeah, in fact, I was just on X today and saw the plummeting fertility rates in most of Asia. Just plummeting. Yeah. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's not good.
Really.
And I don't think people have grasped the full implications of that.
No. Aging population, who's going to pay for their care? Right, final question, team. We've got negative 4 minutes, and it's just, what's your vision, your dream, your wish for next year? Ashley?
To finally finish my book, which seems to have dragged on for several years, finally get it done and published, and to see some sort of resolution take place in the Middle East so that Israel gets itself back into a position where the world community starts hopefully building relations with it again.
Now, you say book. It was books, isn't it? Fiction and non-fiction?
It is books, but let's get one away before we worry about the other one.
Okay, I'm just being optimistic. Okay, Susie?
Personally, we've had lots of baptisms, lots of salvations this year, and I want more next year. But my husband alluded to that before. Dr. Anthony Fauci needs to be exposed, and I want that to happen next year. I think Elon Musk is with me. A whole bunch of people are with me. That guy needs to go to jail.
Okay, there we go. Well done. Ate?
I trust that Trump and Elon Musk will keep their promise and just move quickly and sort out the Ukraine-Russia war. And I'm really praying that Israel will just continue to defend themselves without interference from the West. And my one big thing is that next year, hopefully, we'll keep the men out of the women's bathroom.
Oh, yes, very important. It's funny, no women want to come in the men's bathroom. Why is that? Simon, wish for next year?
It's very broad. A quieter year. It doesn't matter if that's for me personally, but just for the world. Doesn't matter if it's the Middle East, Ukraine, what's happening in the Indo-Pacific. Quieter, gentler. I just sort of feel for myself personally, through to the world as a whole, we just all need to take a deep breath and just...
If you'd said world peace, we could have entered you in Miss World.
Well, I just like
exactly
to put that lovely
what I was
sash
thinking,
on.
Ashley.
Just want to thank my family.
Yeah, lovely. Brendan?
Well, how do I follow that, you know? I'd like rainbows and unicorns for everyone.
World peace?
World peace.
Stronger parole for repeat violent offenders?
Yeah, just stuff like that. I'll tell you what, I'd actually like to see a bit more of what we in the Catholic circles call Episcopal spine. I'd like to see some of our church leaders engaging in the public square again and actually sort of starting to take hold of their own legitimate sovereignty and saying, hey, look, government, we've got some good ideas too. We need to be part of this mix. And I'd really love to see a bit more of that.
Okay, well, that's the end of our second year of Straight Talk. We will be back early next year in February, and the panel will be back. So thank you, team. Ashley, Susie, Ate, Simon, Brendan, fantastic job. Actually, if you want to see a bit more of Simon and Brendan, they're going to be on stage at Parliament on Saturday at about 2 p.m. or a bit after that, after a march around Parliament. And so as we leave tonight, I just want to play a little promo for what's happening on Saturday before we check out. But thank you, panelists. Great job. And thank you for watching Straight Talk. We will return next year. Have a great night.
Hello, New Zealand. March for life. March on behalf of the most vulnerable, the most precious, our children, our future. You are marching for mothers and fathers, for families, to support them, to nourish them, because we know that our countries are founded on families, are founded on the future, which is our children. Over 500,000 lives have been lost in New Zealand to abortion. Our movement is a winning one. This is the good news. Change is possible.